I have a story to tell about something that happened to our family last week. I'm sorry, I try not to get emotional, but it was a scary story. And before I go into it, I want you to know it has a happy ending, okay? So when I'm telling this, don't get too upset. Leave that to me.
That was last night. Jimmy Kimmel, as we've never seen him, the father of a newborn baby, worried if his son, William John Kimmel, was going to survive the first day of his life. Jimmy cries at many points telling this story, and it's hard not to cry with him. You owe it to yourself to watch the whole 13 minutes online. Almost everything about it is surprising. That it's happening on a comedy show where Jimmy is supposed to be telling jokes, and that it turns political at the end. What is not surprising is a parent's reaction to the possible loss of a newborn baby and what will clearly be Jimmy Kimmel's lifetime of gratitude to the people who saved his son Billy's life. If you've ever shared anything like the experience that the Kimmel family went through, you understand why Jimmy takes the time to thank by name every nurse and every physician at 2 different hospitals who sprung into action to save Billy Kimmel's life. Here is some of that story.
When a very attentive nurse at Cedars-Sinai Hospital, her name is Nanush, was checking him out and heard a murmur in his heart, which is common with newborn babies, but she also noticed he was a bit purple, which is not common. So I accompanied Billy and the nurse, went down the hall to another part of the hospital, the neonatal ICU, where another excellent nurse named Ann checked him out and called the doctor in. And now all of a sudden it felt serious. And the room started to fill up. More doctors and nurses and equipment started coming in. They did an x-ray and his lungs were fine, which meant his heart wasn't. So now more doctors and nurses and equipment come in, and it's a terrifying thing. They call a pediatric cardiologist, Dr. Evan Zahn, who, when they called him, was picking his mother up from the airport. Luckily, her plane was not delayed because he got to the hospital very quickly. They did an echocardiogram, which is a sonogram of the heart, and found that Billy was born with a heart disease. Then they brought my wife in, and they wheeled her in, and Dr. Zahn told her what was going on and what our options were, and we decided to take him to Children's Hospital, where there's a world-renowned cardiac surgeon who is, by all accounts, a genius. His name is Dr. Von Starnes. So we put the baby in an ambulance to Children's Hospital, Los Angeles, and on Monday morning, Dr. Starnes opened his chest and fixed one of the 2 defects in his heart. He went in there with a scalpel and did some kind of magic that I couldn't even begin to explain. He opened the valve, and the operation was a success. It was the longest 3 hours of my life, but it was a success. So, they didn't do everything. He'll have to have another open heart surgery in 3 to 6 months to close those holes, but they want to wait until he's bigger, and then he'll have a third, hopefully non-invasive procedure sometime maybe in his early teens to replace the valve he has now. So this poor kid, this is what he looked like on Monday. But this is what he looked like yesterday. We brought him home.
Jimmy then thanked all of the lifesavers at both hospitals, beginning again with the nurse who first recognized the problem, Nanush Shirkonia. He then thanked his wife, his parents, his friends, and even though he hated to say it, he thanked Matt Damon, which of course got a big laugh, as did a few other lines in this remarkable late-night monologue where a comedian with tears on his face was still able to reach for a laugh here and there. Then Jimmy Kimmel did something he's not known for. He turned political. But he was making a political statement about something that he believes should be above politics, something he believes we all agree on.
And I want to say one other thing. President Trump last month proposed a $6 billion cut in funding to the National Institute of Health. And thank God our congressman made a deal last night to not go along with that. They actually increased funding by $2 billion, and I applaud them for doing that. Because more than 40% of the people who would have been affected by those cuts to the National Institute of Health are children, and it would have a major impact on a lot of great places, including Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, which is so unbelievably sad to me. We were brought up to believe that we live in the greatest country in the world, but until a few years ago, millions and millions of us had no access to health insurance at all. You know, before 2014, if you were born with congenital heart disease like my son was, there was a good chance you'd never be able to get health insurance because you had a pre-existing condition. You were born with a pre-existing condition. If your parents didn't have medical insurance, you might not live long enough to even get denied because of a pre-existing condition. If your baby is going to die, and it doesn't have to, it shouldn't matter how much money you make. I think that's something that, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or something else, we all agree on that, right? I mean, we do.
Unfortunately, we don't all agree on that. Most of us do. Big majority of Americans agree that any child born with a heart defect like Billy Kimmel should get the treatment that Jimmy Kimmel was able to afford. The reason President Trump wants to cut the budget of the National Institutes of Health is that we don't all agree on what Jimmy Kimmel wants us to agree on. The reason President Trump is trying to repeal Obamacare and deny in health insurance, take it away from 24 million people, according to the latest estimates, is that we don't all agree that every baby born in America has the same right to medical treatment.
No, I do not believe that health care is a basic right.
Not a basic right. That's a Republican member of Congress who wants to repeal Obamacare and deprive 24 million people of the health care they now have. Today, Steve Kornacki spoke to a Republican member of Congress who is opposed to the repeal of Obamacare because he doesn't want to take health care away from millions of people who currently have it.
Some of the conservatives, have believed that they want to repeal more and really go at the idea that these programs are not entitlement programs.
That's a Republican member of Congress telling you that the most conservative members of Congress do not believe, as a matter of political philosophy, that every baby born in America is entitled to open heart surgery if that baby needs it, or that every baby is even entitled to a normal delivery in a hospital. And that disagreement that those conservative members of Congress have with Jimmy Kimmel and the majority of Americans is the source of all of the political craziness over health care that Washington has been going through in the 8 years since President Obama started pushing health care reform.
Stop with the nonsense. This isn't football. There are no teams. We are the team. It's the United States. Don't let their partisan squabbles divide us on something every decent person wants. We need to take care of each other.
The last Republican president who believed that was this guy. Richard Nixon pushed a health care reform bill in 1974 that was blocked by Democrats because the Democrats thought they could do better when they won back the White House, but they won back the White House and did nothing. It's always been a political football. Richard Nixon, who grew up in a family who always struggled to make ends meet financially, lived through something worse than what Jimmy Kimmel and his family went through last week. Richard Nixon watched his younger brother Arthur die of tuberculosis at age 7. Richard Nixon watched his older brother Harold die of tuberculosis at age 23. Richard Nixon knew what it was like for families who couldn't afford health care. But no Republican president in the 43 years since Richard Nixon tried it has ever even attempted to expand access to health care to people who cannot afford it. Not one of them has tried to do what Jimmy Kimmel thinks we all agree on. Jimmy Kimmel didn't mean to enter a political debate last night, but taking health insurance away from people became more politically difficult today because of what Jimmy Kimmel said last night. Defunding the National Institutes of Health became more difficult today because of what Jimmy Kimmel said last night. And no politician or political speechwriter was involved in what Jimmy Kimmel said last night. Speaking from the heart about his baby's heart, Jimmy Kimmel delivered the most important speech about health care that we will hear this year.
I saw a lot of families there, and no parent should ever have to decide if they can afford to save their child's life. It just shouldn't happen. Not here. So